that is because they have to justify their existence. The fact is that they have done everything in their power to cover up the truth. The area of investigation, at minimum, has been blocked by the Central Intelligence Agency on behalf of the Bush administration, because finding out the truth in this area exposes the global energy industrialists and the Bush family's connection to them. Now, on the lower left-hand side of your screen, you see Bioport, closest to mailed anthrax, Ames, Iowa strain. That's because they're the only manufacturers of the anthrax vaccine. And who owns, ultimately, Bioport? If you go up the list of the suspects or the owners, you ultimately get to the British governors who run Porton Down. Porton Products. Porton Down is Britain's leading biological and chemical testing, weapons testing center. They spun off, like we do in the United States, when the global industrialists want to profiteer off of the government taxpayer-funded research and investments. They spin off the technology for-profit entities. So Porton Products owns Porton Bioport. And that ultimately, what's called below it, the Institute for Genomic Research, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes with that. Institute for Genomic Research is the leading DNA sequencing organization in the United States, if not the world. A fellow there by the name of J. Craig Ventnor, who is this absolute Looney Tune, is the director of this organization, and that ultimately come to find out that this is owned by an organization, Institute for Genomic Research, which did the DNA sequencing on not only the anthrax, but also the smallpox, and literally privatized through a series of absolute astonishing manipulations, ended up privatizing the Human Genome Project away from the United States federal government and the taxpayers' benefit. In other words, we had funded the deciphering of the DNA sequence. Only a couple weeks before the final announcement and the final whole sequence of the human genome was to be released, along comes J. Craig Ventnor, through some backroom dealings with higher government officials in the United States, gets the rights to patent everything having to do with the human genome. And ultimately now it's owned by, and the patent rights are given to, either the British oligarchy or their organizations and institutions, or Rockefeller University. Those are the ones who are patenting the genes that you're being told will be the salvation for humanity. Medicine, new vaccines, gene therapy is all going to be coming out of this, they say, and all of this represents the windfall of profits for the new millennium, they think. Now, who owns the Institute for Genomic Research? It's an organization, corporation called Celera, which is owned by a Plera, which is owned by George Soros, who is the money manager for 99, which is upside down, backwards 66. I told you the highest level oligarchy are using the multiples of 9. 99 of Europe's top oligarchy, top aristocracy, including Queen Elizabeth II, used George Soros as a money manager. Where did he get his start? And by the way, he's classic for those who call themselves Jews who are not. He got his start because during World War II, his father, who was apparently a Nazi sympathizer, gave him Nazi identifications to go out to identify wealthy Jewish estates for being taken over by the Nazis. This is the man who runs the fund that is making the most money of any fund on the planet today. That's why the British oligarchy uses George Soros's quantum fund. So ultimately, who owns Porton Products and the spin-offs of Porton Products, including Bioport, is ultimately, again, the British royalty. And they have been producing the anthrax vaccine in Britain for distribution, including to Saddam Hussein and the Saudis, for years. So again, it all flows back to the British oligarchy insofar as the anthrax mailings is concerned. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you see that there is American Hope Products, Baxter, which produces the smallpox vaccine and the West Nile virus vaccine, along with a canvas. You see the flow goes down to, for the West Nile virus vaccine, a canvas, which was purchased by Oravax, which purchased Oravax, which was bought out by Aventis, which is a subsidiary of Hoax, linked to Merck again. There you see Merck next to Bayer is virtually at the center of the diagram. Now, this is very interesting in regard to the West Nile virus outbreaks in recent days. The pesticide sprayings, because in the book Death in the Air, I go into who is the principal manufacturer of the sumithrin, which is the agent that's being used to spray, the principal agent used to spray the mosquito populations to allegedly ward off the West Nile virus. This is produced by Rockefeller Chevron Corporation. The West Nile virus first came to the United States, not as the media has been saying, that is in the late 1990s. It came in 1938 from the West Nile region of northwest Uganda, where there was Lytton Bionetics operative, or forerunners to Lytton Bionetics, operating associated with the first cancer research and viral research experimental labs set up by Rockefellers and friends and sent to New York to Rockefeller University around 1938-39. That's when the West Nile virus first came to America. Then it went to Yale, largely funded and built by Rockefellers, and interestingly enough, the Royal Vatican has a major player in funding Yale as well, particularly the history department there. So you're looking at the dead crows that were falling out, actually fell out not in 1998, 99. They started to fall out about a decade before that on Plum Island Laboratories, which is a biological weapons testing center on Long Island, right across the water from Lyme, Connecticut, which is where most people who are studied believe the Lyme disease epidemic came from. Again, another man-made biological weapons laboratory creation. So the spraying, it's standard Machiavellian theory and practice. You create the problems, you create the solutions. You create the West Nile virus breaking out, and then you get to spray your toxic pesticide for what? Non-lethal warfare. Intoxicating unsuspecting populations, human populations, with toxic chemicals. That's why, again, not one study has shown that this is a beneficial strategy in public health. And yet all the public health officials are keeping their money coming, telling you what the CDC's line is. Now, get this. Dr. Thomas Monath was the top West Nile virus. Dr. Thomas Monath, who co-owned Oravax Corporation. He was a major player at the Centers for Disease Control as a top arbovirus. That's the West Nile virus, is a type of an arbovirus, as is St. Louis virus, as is Japanese encephalitis. Yet when you go into Lytton's early reports to the National Cancer Institute, they didn't have those viruses either. They started with one encephalitis virus called Dawson's, but they mutated it and hybridized it, changed it in the labs, create various strains of arboviruses. So they create West Nile. Now, this fellow, the top expert in the field of arboviruses, goes to CDC, works for them after he works for Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is America's premier biological weapons testing center in Frederick, Maryland. And then he meets, get this, in a back room, closed-door affair with President Clinton, Janet Reno, CIA Director John Deutsch, Mayor Giuliani's emergency management director back in 1997 called Jerry Hoyer, who today is America's emergency management director for Homeland Security. He meets with these guys, and also J. Craig Ventnor was there from the Institute for Genomic Research, as well as Rockefeller crony, past president of Rockefeller University, Dr. Joshua Lederberg. That's basically who was there. And that what they did was they sold Clinton administration on purchasing over a year and a half before the West Nile virus was alleged to have broken out in New York, the West Nile virus vaccine that his company on the verge of bankruptcy was the sole producer of.